afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third Ambassador Rodolfo C. Severino Jr. Memorial Lecture. To formally begin this event, let us start with the singing of the Philippine National Anthem, followed by an invocation of God's blessing. Please all rise.
In omnibus amare et servire Domino in everything.
Take your seats, please. Good afternoon to everyone. Once again, my name is Alma Maria Salvador, Associate Professor of Political Science. We are happy to welcome you to this year's Severino Lecture. This event is co-organized by the following: the Ateneo European Studies Program, the Ateneo School of Social Sciences, and the Carlos P. Romulo Foundation for Peace and Development. This event is one of the programs under the Ambassador Rodolfo C. Severino Jr. Endowment Fund, which was established in August of 2020 by the late Ambassador Roberto R. Romulo to honor his mentor, Ambassador Severino, as one of the country's most respected diplomats. The lecture is a third of a series that began in 2021. The inaugural Severino Lecture had to be held online due to the ongoing lockdown restrictions in the country. And it focused on the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea, the title of which is It Worth Pursuing? Last year's Severino Lecture was a return to the on-site at the Ateneo Professional Schools in Rockwell. It focused on the directions and challenges of the Marcos Jr. administration's foreign policy. This year's lecture, on the other hand, will be focused on the European perspective on the West Philippine Sea and its implication to Philippine foreign policy. We would like to acknowledge the presence of the members of the Diplomatic Corps, the CPR Foundation, the Severino family, the deans and faculty of the Ateneo de Manila University, including University President Father Roberto C. We would also like to greet our online audience. Hello to our online audience who are also tuning in today's via the live stream on Ateneo YouTube channel. Before we proceed in today's discussion, may I please invite Dr. Maria Luz C. Vilches, our Vice President for Higher Education, this university, to give her welcome remarks.
Father Bobby Yap, President of Ateneo de Manila, Ambassador Antonio Basilio, Executive Director of the Carlos P. Romulo Foundation for Peace and Development, Dr. Andreas Michael Pfaffernoschke, Ambassador of the Federal Republic of Germany to the Philippines, Dr. Isabel Sanchez Ruiz, Chargé d'Affaires ad interim of the Delegation of the European Union to the Philippines, representing European Union Ambassador Luc Veron, Mr. Adam Folleas, Officer of Higher Education and Linguistics of the French Embassy in the Philippines, Honorable Justice of the Supreme Court of the Philippines, Antonio T. Carpio, Dr. Alma Salvador, faculty members, students, Mr. Rodolfo G. Severino III, Howie Severino, and the other members of the Severino family present here, other honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. On behalf of our community, I warmly welcome you all to this third Ambassador Rodolfo Severino Lecture and to the Ateneo de Manila University. It is great that we can now hold this lecture with more ease face-to-face, and that after a couple of postponements, this is finally taking place. So warm welcome, despite all the rain and gloom outside, warm welcome with a lot of light in this room. As Alma said earlier, last year's lecture was held in our Rockwell campus, and I remember that it was on the theme, Directions and Challenges of the Marcos Jr.'s Administration and Foreign Policy. It was a topic that honored Honorable Enrique Manalo, Secretary of the Department of Foreign Affairs, tackled and further discussed with reverberating questions from the audience. This time, we confront the topic, European Perspective on the West Philippine Sea, Influences on Foreign Policy. We are fortunate to have with us eminent members of the diplomatic corps that can shed light on this theme, and we're also honored to have Justice Carpio here as our discussant. Justice Carpio, as we know, has been a staunch advocate of our vigilance over and defense of the West Philippine Sea. The man for whom this lecture is named, Ambassador Rodolfo Severino, must be very pleased watching where we are who continue the conversations about the West Philippine Sea, an issue that was central to his strategic vision when he was still Undersecretary at the Department of Foreign Affairs. This vision was acknowledged by Henry Bensuerto Jr., Philippine Consul General to San Francisco, as, I quote, the brains behind the Philippines' policy in the South China Sea disputes, end of quote. The issues surrounding the West Philippine Sea are far from over, as we know. But through conversations like this, that's going to happen this afternoon, we gain a greater perspective that allows us to make some sense of the conundrums that beset our lives surrounding these issues. And we hope that we will find the appropriate courses of action that will set us free. Let's earnestly listen to the presentations that will follow and enjoy the discussion. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vilches, for the opening remarks. And to formally introduce our distinguished panel of speakers, may I please call on Ambassador Antonio Basilio, Executive Director of the Carlos P. Romulo Foundation. Ambassador.
Ateneo University President, Father Roberto Yap, Vice President for Higher Education, Dr. Luz Vilches, Father Norberto Bautista, the Director for University Development and Alumni Relations, our distinguished panel of speakers, so whom I will be introducing shortly, Justice Antonio Carpio, Howie and Kokoy Severino, faculty members, distinguished guests, fellow Ateneans in the audience, and online, good afternoon. I speak on behalf of the Board of Directors and members of the Carlos P. Romulo Foundation, the co-organizer of this event, the third Ambassador Rodolfo Severino Jr. Lecture. This annual event is one of the major outcomes envisioned under the professional and professorial endowment, which was founded by our late chairman, Bobby Romulo, and endowed to the Ateneo de Manila's University School of Social Sciences. Like Chairman Romulo, I had the good fortune of working under the tutelage of Rod, first when we were posted together in Beijing, although my specific assignment focused on international economic relations or bilateral economic relations. And although this was the only post we served together, we became fast friends and interacted frequently over the years until his passing. So it is a privilege for me to serve as a trustee of the endowment as my way of contributing to keeping his memory alive. The West Philippine Sea, South China Sea dispute over competing claims of sovereignty over these vital waterways, rich in natural resources, has simmered for years with occasional flare-ups. Each instance, however, cannot be dismissed, as each one brings with it the threat of escalation through miscalculation. Last August 5, the Chinese Coast Guard blocked and fired water cannons at Philippine vessels seeking to deliver food, fuel, and water to Filipino troops stationed on the BRP Sierra Madre. The Sierra Madre has been grounded at the Second Thomas Shoal, or Ayungin Shoal, since the late 1990s to deter further Chinese incursions following their occupation of Mischief Reef. The United States condemned the Chinese action. Britain, Australia, Canada, and the European Union were quick to follow in also criticizing Beijing's actions. The European Union has called for the rule of law, the preservation of the freedom of navigation, and the peaceful resolution of the dispute with ASEAN's involvement. While this criticism and this position from Europe does not constitute a sea change from previous positions, it comes at the time of intensifying actions with European participation in freedom of navigation operations, joint exercises, security dialogues, and support for the Indo-Pacific framework espoused by the United States. To help us understand the nuances of the European perspective and discern how this may have implications, if any, on the current Philippine strategy, we have invited a distinguished panel of speakers to share with us their insights. His Excellency, Dr. Andreas Michael Pfaffernoschke, German Ambassador to the Philippines, was kind enough to accept our invitation, despite only recently presenting his credentials to President Marcos Jr. on August 17. He is an economist by training, having earned his doctoral degree in 1990. He joined the German Federal Foreign Office in 1992, and since then has assumed various posts in the head offices as well as overseas. Those overseas posts include stints at the United Nations in Geneva and then in New York. He was most recently the German ambassador to Burkina Faso. Dr. Ana Isabel Sanchez Ruiz has been the deputy head of the European Delegation to the Philippines since August 2021. She has worked for the European Union for over 20 years, in which she has held responsibilities for multilateral relations, transatlantic relations, and maritime border management. She also served at the delegation of the European Union to Japan. And before joining the EU, she was a lecturer in public international law at Madrid's Complutense University. She has a PhD in law. We also have with us Mr. Adam Folleas, Officer for Higher Education and Culture of the French Embassy in the Philippines, and I would consider the resident expert on China in the embassy because of his past academic background. He is a graduate of Sorbonne University, where he earned his bachelor's and master's degree. His master's thesis was the evolution of Sino-European partnership from 1989 to 2013. His views about China perhaps have also evolved since 2013, because when he obtained another master's degree in 2020 from another school, his master's thesis was on the EU and the New Silk Road, the port of Piraeus, a Chinese dragonhead in Europe. Our discussant is retired Supreme Court Associate Justice Antonio Carpio, who needs no introduction unless you've been living under a rock past few years. He has lectured extensively, locally and internationally, and has written a book on the West Philippine Sea. He is a highly decorated alumnus of both his alma mater, Ateneo University, and the University of the Philippines. And my only claim to fame is that I graduated 1 year earlier than Justice Carpio with a degree in economics also. So I could say he was following my footsteps, and look where it got him. I think the most apt description of Justice Carpio is what appears in his official website: jurist, scholar, and patriot. Nobody can argue with that. So before I leave the rostrum, I would like to take this opportunity to express my appreciation to Ateneo for their wise and astute management of this program and for the effort expended to organize this event, particularly to Father Bautista, Professor Salvador, and Jeng Mglalan. And with that, I will turn the floor over to our moderator, Dr. Ana Maria Salvador. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Basilio. May we now hear you, His Excellency Dr. Andreas Michael Pfaffernoschke, Ambassador of the Federal Republic of Germany.
I'm a small man, but it's a bit higher. Yeah, fine. Okay. Thank you so much. Dear Ms. Vice President Vilches, Ambassador Basilio, Honorable Justice Caprio, dear co-panelists, excellencies, dear faculty members, students, dear participants. Let me start by extending a very warm welcome and warm congratulations to the Carlos Romuald Foundation for organizing this Ambassador Rodolfo Severino lecture today and for giving me the honor to participate as a discussant. It's a pleasure to be here for the first time in this university, and I'm particularly happy to see so many students, participants in this room, obviously very much interested in this important subject. The topic today is crucially important, and therefore let me directly jump into the issues. What is the European perspective, not only on the West Philippine Sea, but on the Indo-Pacific region as a whole? What is Europe's foreign and security policy in the region? And luckily, I'm here as the German ambassador, but we have also Anna Ruiz from the EU delegation to speak on the European perspective, and my French colleague to speak on the French perspective. So what is the German view? What is and what can Germany do, and what's Germany's role in the Indo-Pacific region, more than 10,000 kilometers away from Berlin? The Indo-Pacific region is clearly a region on the rise, a region with booming markets, with a young and skilled workforce hungry for innovation and prosperity, with regional organizations like ASEAN striving to achieve peace and security in the region. But it is, as it has been mentioned by the ambassador, also a region with rising tensions and challenges. Recent events in the South China Sea have shown how fragile the situation is and how important it is to find sustainable and negotiated solutions for peace and stability in the region. Let me say very clearly, unilaterally drawing new geographical maps without the consent of other countries in the region concerned does not contribute to peace and stability. It only leads to new tensions and new frontiers in the region and in maritime governance. And the same holds true for any attempt to block supply ships in the economic exclusive zone of a country and to try to undermine the sovereignty of countries in the region. And referring to recent events, I think the same holds also true for putting up barriers that block fishermen ships to enter into their fishing grounds, which are clearly in the economic zone, exclusive economic zone of the Philippines. Ladies and gentlemen, the Indo-Pacific will determine, perhaps more than any other place in the world, the future of the international order for the centuries to come. That is why I value very much this opportunity to talk about the European perspective. Russia's brutal war of aggression against Ukraine, breaking with international rules and using crude violence against a peaceful country, continues to challenge the international world order since more than 18 months now. And I'm particularly happy that Foreign Secretary Manello in New York just last week clearly made his confirmation of the commitment of the Philippine government to the international world order. We are friends in this. We are united in this. We share the same values and the same approach on keeping the international and safeguarding the international order. And it is exactly because of Russia's war of aggression that Europe and Germany remain firm in our commitment to the Indo-Pacific and in defending this rules-based international order. We stay firm in defending it in Europe and in the Indo-Pacific region. In the aftermath of the Second World War and during the Cold War, Germany has learned painfully what it means if rules are not respected, if your neighbor is threatening you with military aggression. So let me come back to what that means for our engagement and commitment to the Indo-Pacific region. Germany is a trading nation. Millions of jobs in Germany depend on our trade with other countries. We are the biggest trading partner of the Philippines within the EU and the most important investor. We share every interest in an Indo-Pacific region that is peaceful, where international law is respected and where every country is free to determine its future and making independent political and economic choices. This includes, of course, the security of shipping routes in Southeast Asia and sea lines of communication, which are of vital interest to the EU and Germany. Instability in this vital region would affect 1/3 of global maritime trade crossing through the South China Sea. As a result, the EU and Germany are expanding our cooperation in working closely with our partners in the region with the aim to safeguard and uphold a rules-based order that has been the essential foundation for the unprecedented growth, peace and stability in the region over the last decades. The Philippines are a key partner in this respect. In 2020, Germany has adopted its policy guidelines on the Indo-Pacific region. Germany pursues an approach which is open, transparent and inclusive, an approach based on rules and multilateral cooperation that stands to benefit everyone. With these guidelines, we commit to step up our engagement vis-à-vis ASEAN by different initiatives. In the area of strengthening peace and security, the German government is continuing its efforts to protect the rules-based international order in the South China Sea by doing its utmost to safeguard the principles of UNCLOS and expanding security and defense cooperation with our partners. We would like to be even more closely involved in this cooperation, as we currently are seeking observer status at the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus, the ADMM Plus, by strengthening existing ASEAN security cooperation mechanisms and by pursuing cybersecurity cooperation and dialogue with partners in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, the tensions in the South China Sea are complex and difficult to resolve, no doubt. And as we saw earlier this month, the incidents that occurred do not only carry the risk of escalation, but they put the universal application of UNCLOS into question. Let me be clear again here. The arbitration award of 2016 is legally binding on all parties. There's nothing to discuss about that. UNCLOS is the comprehensive universal framework for all activities in the oceans and the seas and must guide the conduct of all parties in the South China Sea. The Philippines can count on Germany in asserting its right under international law. We will continue to speak out strongly against violations of any country's sovereign rights under UNCLOS. We have at several occasions clearly expressed our position on the South China Sea and supported the 2016 arbitral award on the South China Sea. We are opposed to the formation of blocs in the region and to the involvement of new borders. No one should be forced to choose sides. Germany will always support multilateral comparative mechanisms, confidence-building measures, and ways to reduce tensions as well as limit the risks of escalation and solve disputes peacefully. Disputes around land claims are not new, but they are becoming increasingly tense, and the prospect of violent escalation is rising with the build-up of military infrastructure and dangerous encounters on the open sea. But power and might do not make right. Let me also clearly state that Germany definitely is not an Indo-Pacific power in military terms, and we have no intention to become one. Other European partners are much better positioned to do so. We have no permanent military presence in the region, and we are not striving for it. Our presence in the region is focused on Europe's role as a partner interested in defending the international rules-based order, in promoting mutually advantageous economic relations, and in securing trade routes. We do this as a member of the EU, and we align ourselves fully with the EU strategy for the Indo-Pacific. I'm convinced that evolving new frontiers, new borders, are in nobody's interest. Countries in the region, with the support of friends and like-minded partners, should do their utmost to avoid new frontiers and to come to peaceful solutions. We need cooperation and dialogue, sustainable solution, and a common understanding of how to design the future of the region. Germany stands ready to face these pressing challenges together with our partners in the Indo-Pacific, and particularly with the Philippines. Let me announce also here that beginning of November, German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock will pay a visit to the Philippines, where exactly all these issues will definitely be high on the agenda, and the support for the Philippine position will definitely again confirmed by the German Foreign Minister. Thank you very much for the invitation again. I look forward to a very interesting dialogue. Maraming salamat po. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Our second presenter and speaker is Honorable Dr. Ana Isabel Sanchez Ruiz.
Thank you so much. I would like to acknowledge President Father Roberto Yap, Vice President for Higher Education, Dr. Vilches, Ambassador Basilio, Your Excellency Ambassador Pfaffernoschke, Honorable Justice Antonio Carpio, and other distinguished co-participants and members of the public, Magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. Thank you for the invitation to present the EU perspective on the South China Sea, and I am a bit afraid that you will hear some things second time after the presentation by Ambassador Pfaffernoschke. But at least it will be a different tone of voice, I think. I will speak of the South China Sea, even if I am aware that the Philippine legislation recognizes as West Philippine Sea the parts of the South China Sea that are included in the country's exclusive economic zone on the western side of the Philippine archipelago. The South China Sea, as Ambassador Pfaffernoschke said, is a critical waterway for the European Union and for the world. 1/3 of global trade goes through the South China Sea, including much of the trade between the European Union and some of its main international trade partners, notably China, the ASEAN countries, South Korea, and Japan. In a much interconnected world, any disruption of this traffic could have very serious impacts on the world economy. The South China Sea is also very important as pertains to the environment, biodiversity, and the climate, and its living and non-living resources. It accounts for around 12% of the global fish catch and hosts more than half of the world's fishing vessels. Therefore, what happens in the South China Sea matters to the European Union, to its security and to its prosperity. The EU has a strong interest and a stake in peace, stability, and the preservation of the environment and biodiversity in this part of the world. It is in everyone's interest, both countries around the South China Sea and the rest of the world, that international law is complied with in the region as elsewhere, and that sea lines of communication remain free, open, and secure. The UN Charter and treaties such as the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea lay down the principles and rules to ensure pacific coexistence and conflict resolution, as well as the rights and obligations of all countries. Being a founding member of the ASEAN Regional Forum and high contracting party to the 1976 Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in Southeast Asia also reinforces the EU's stake in the furtherance of peace, harmony, and stability in the region. Therefore, the position of the European Union on the South China Sea is grounded in interests, values, and principles, the support for the rules-based international order. The European Union has expressed on several occasions its serious concerns about the situation in the South China Sea. The EU has underlined the critical importance of respecting international law, including the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea UNCLOS, in particular, the obligation to settle disputes by peaceful means and to maintain freedom of navigation and overflight. The EU has also underscored the importance of respecting the sovereign rights of states within their exclusive economic zones, consistent with international law, in particular UNCLOS. The EU strongly opposes any unilateral attempts to change the status quo by force or coercion and increase tensions that endanger peace, security, and stability and the rules-based international order. The EU has expressed serious concern about reports of militarization and the use of threat of force and other acts of intimidation and coercion in the South China Sea, such as the last recent incident in Ayungin Shoal on August 5th, and similar incidents before that. The EU has also reiterated the obligation to comply with decisions rendered by a court or tribunal based on legitimate procedures under UNCLOS, in particular the 2016 arbitration award in the case brought by the Philippines against China, which laid down very clearly that there is no legal basis for China's expansive maritime claims in the South China Sea. The EU has also underlined the importance of protecting the marine ecosystem, which is endangered by the intensification of maritime traffic and dredging, as we have seen very recently in Rosyth Reef and Skoda Shoal. As stated in its Indo-Pacific strategy, the EU is determined to work with the Philippines and other partners in support of a free and open Indo-Pacific, and more broadly, of an international order based on the rule of law and the UN Charter, to the benefit of all countries, irrespective of their size or their power. The EU also stands ready to facilitate activities that help build confidence and prevent and diffuse tensions. Maritime security has long been a shared priority for both the EU and ASEAN. The EU and ASEAN have been holding a high-level dialogue on maritime security cooperation since 2014. Cooperation between the two regions has focused on responding to transnational maritime threats such as piracy, smuggling, illegal immigration, disaster risk, and the impacts of pollution and climate change. Within the ASEAN Regional Forum, IRF, the EU has co-sponsored initiatives to develop voluntary and non-binding guidelines to prevent and manage incidents between maritime law enforcement agencies, which unfortunately were blocked by China. The EU also supports the ASEAN-led process towards an effective, substantive, and legally binding code of conduct in the South China Sea, which should not prejudice the interests of third parties. Meanwhile, the 2002 Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea should be implemented fully and effectively. As concerns our bilateral cooperation with the Philippines, under the EU-Philippines Partnership and Cooperation Agreement, we have now a new bilateral dialogue on maritime matters, which will lay the ground for further cooperation in areas such as maritime security, maritime labor, and IUU fishing. The first meeting of this subcommittee on maritime cooperation will take place this week in Brussels on September 27th, and will discuss matters such as maritime security and defense, maritime domain awareness, connectivity, and sustainable development and ocean governance. The EU is also stepping up its engagement in more operational terms. Since 2018, the EU has been building capacity of partners in the Indo-Pacific so that they can better address threats to maritime safety and security, respond to disasters, and preserve fish stocks through a project called Critical Maritime Routes in the Indian Ocean, CREMARIO. The core of this project is the Indo-Pacific Regional Information Sharing, IORIS, a neutral and secure platform for coordination and information sharing between national and regional maritime agencies with the objective of improving maritime domain awareness and operational responses. The EU has been training Philippine officials from the Navy, the Coast Guard, and other departments involved in maritime law enforcement on the use of this platform. So far, more than 50 civilian and military agencies from over 20 countries across Indo-Pacific have signed the IORIS Partnership Agreement, which offers IORIS functionalities and satellite services in exchange for effective and regular use of the platform. From the Philippines, the National Coastguard Center, the Philippine Coast Guard, and the Maritime Industry Authority, Marina, have already signed the IORIS Partnership Agreement. We are happy to see that CREMARIO is stimulating Philippine agencies with maritime responsibilities to cooperate with each other. A very successful tabletop and field training exercise involving 150 staff from 10 Philippine agencies took place in Manila last August, using IORIS for interagency planning, coordination, and the gathering, analysis, and exchange of information. The EU is organizing other maritime capacity building activities with the Philippines and other countries in the region, complementing its contributions to regional security through the IRF. Besides the exchange of knowledge and information, this helps build trust amongst Asian and European officials and other experts. We also hope to develop cooperation and complementarity with other like-minded partners, such as, for example, Japan, who are also active in building maritime security capacity in the Indo-Pacific, including the Philippines. The EU is also supporting the Philippines and other countries in the region through regional and bilateral programs and dialogues in support of the management of protected areas and the development of sustainable fisheries, including combating illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. The European Union is also supporting the Philippines and other South China Sea coastal states with satellite imagery for a better understanding and improved monitoring of human activities at sea, such as those related to maritime safety, maritime security, customs, law enforcement, marine pollution monitoring, fisheries control, and international cooperation. And we hope to do more from renewable energy to underwater cables. Please let me just conclude by saying that only the effective implementation of UNCLOS, as well as international cooperation at regional, sub-regional, and bilateral levels can guarantee global maritime security, safety, and the sustainability of our oceans and seas, and I'm looking forward to our discussion later on. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ruiz. Our third speaker is Mr. Adam Folleas, Officer for Higher Education and Linguistics of the French Embassy in the Philippines.
President Father Yap, Dr. Maria Luz C. Vilches, Ambassador Antonio Basilio, Dr. Andreas Michael Pfaffernoschke, Ambassador, Dr. Anna Isabel Sanchez Ruiz, esteemed member of the Severino family, esteemed diplomats, and distinguished scholars, I extend my heartfelt gratitude for granting me the honor of addressing you today at the esteemed Ateneo de Manila University. Our Ambassador Marie Fontanelle has entrusted me with the task of addressing you today on the occasion of the third Ambassador Rodolfo C. Severino Lecture. In this discussion, I will delve into France's stance on the subject European perspective on the West Philippine Sea, also referred as South China Sea, influence on foreign policy. I will explain how France's viewpoint is aligned with the broader European context, intersecting with the complexities of the West Philippine Sea matter. This alignment underscores shared values, adherence to international norms, and the pursuit of regional stability. The historical tapestry of the West Philippine Sea spans decades, interwoven with territorial disputes and intricate geopolitical dynamics. This region's strategic importance, with its valuable resources and critical sea routes, amplifies its global significance. From our perspective, addressing the intricacies of the West Philippine Sea entails understanding its historical context and acknowledging its geopolitical ramifications. Our foreign policy approach embraces a comprehensive understanding of these factors as we work to balance immediate challenges with long-term stability through dialogue and cooperation. Recent events highlight the urgency of cooperation in the West Philippine Sea. From our perspective, these developments emphasize the significance of diplomatic cooperation. In the wake of the brutalization of the world that has been underway for some years now, competitions are intensifying, authoritarianism are asserting themselves, and there is a risk of confrontation. France's steadfast stance not only reinforces our dedication to peaceful dispute resolution, but also highlights the potential of collective action within the European Union and with our Philippine counterparts. While seemingly separated by vast distances, this region's complexities and implications hold profound relevance for our national interests and values. First, France is present through its overseas territories, which account for 93% of its exclusive economic zone in the Indo-Pacific region. These islands are home to nearly 2 million French citizens, protected by ALPACI, our Asia-Pacific command comprising armed force permanently stationed in the area. Furthermore, France's perspective is deeply rooted in our resolute commitments to protect the rule of law, the UNCLOS, and to support the 2016 Arbitral Tribunal ruling. The recent events concerning the Ukraine war offer a poignant illustration of the potential outcomes that can emerge when there is a departure from respecting international law and the principles of a rule-based global order. Within France's commitment to these values lies a deep concern for the broader consequences that can unfold in various geopolitical situations. Just as France approaches maritime security by upholding the rule of law, there is a shared responsibility among the global community to collectively avert further escalations that may arise due to the lack of adherence to these fundamental principles. In the Philippines, this perspective is reflected by a military component, with 3 French ships making a port call in the first semester of 2022. The political dimension is underscored by 2 meetings between Presidents Emmanuel Macron and Ferdinand Marcos Jr. in 2022. The first one was a face-to-face exchange on September 21 on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly. And the second one was a bilateral meeting on the sidelines of the 29th Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation in Bangkok in November. 2023 also marks a significant year in the shaping of the future of this relationship. This cooperation was strengthened by the visits of our Minister of State for Development, Francophonie and International Partnerships, Ms. Chrysoula Zakharopoulou, in late July. This progress is poised to receive additional boosts through upcoming scheduled visits and potentially through an offered invitation for President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. by the French government extending the possibility of a state visit to France. France's increasing presence in regional organizations, notably ASEAN and the Pacific Islands Forum, reflects our commitment to fostering stronger ties. We are actively working to establish bridges between our esteemed partners, exemplified by the productive dialogues initiated with our Indian and Emirati counterparts, as well as our revitalized connections with Indian and Australian counterparts, both of which hold significant promise. In the Indo-Pacific region, our proactive engagements draw strength from the synergy between our overseas territories, embracing our identity as a European nation, with representation across the Indian Ocean and Pacific regions brings us pride. Demonstrating this unity, President Emmanuel Macron undertook an exceptional tour of our island partners in July, outlining an ambitious vision that comes with substantial resource allocation. Our unwavering commitment to the European Union's Indo-Pacific strategy remains resolute, with the objective of amplifying its presence and tangible influence. This deliberate approach underscores our deep-rooted dedication to cooperative diplomacy, fostering shared prosperity across the region. In conclusion, I would like to cite Mr. Albert de Rosario, a distinguished statesman and influential voice in the Philippine diplomacy, who has consistently advocated for a vision rooted in harmony and cooperation within the West Philippine Sea. As the former Secretary of Foreign Affairs, he ardently advanced a principled approach based on international law, notably the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. As part of his concluding remarks at the adjournment of the hearing on the merits at the Permanent Court of Arbitration in November 2015, he said the following words. There are those who think the rule of law in international relations does not apply to great powers. We reject that view. International law is the great equalizer among states. It allows small countries to stand on an equal footing with more powerful states. Those who think might makes right have it backwards. It is exactly the opposite, in that right makes might. The Philippines, through its dedication to international norms and collaborative efforts, is an essential stakeholder and partner in the region. Recent developments, including recent official meetings, France's reiteration of support for the 2016 arbitral tribunal ruling, and its alignment with the broader European Union perspective, exemplify our common dedication to peaceful resolution and regional stability. On a final note, it is also by ensuring the mobility of people in the region that we can foster mutual understanding and harmony. As an official for higher education and linguistics, my role centers on facilitating educational exchanges that transcend boundaries. By promoting such mobility, we lay the foundation for peace building through shared knowledge and cultural understanding, envisioning a world where unity prevails over divergence. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Folleas. And now, may we please kindly call on Justice Antonio Carpio for his presentation of his discussion. Justice.
Father Bobby Yap, Dr. Maria Luz Vilches, distinguished speakers, distinguished guests, fellow Ateneans, friends, good evening to everyone. From the discussions of our distinguished speakers, I gather that the Philippines and the EU share at least three common perspectives on the South China Sea dispute. First, the primacy of the existing rules-based international order must be upheld. This fundamental legal order, enshrined as the foundational principle in the 1945 UN Charter, mandates that all disputes between states must be settled by peaceful means through negotiation, mediation, arbitration, or other peaceful means chosen by the parties, and that the threat or use of force shall be outlawed in the settlement of such disputes. In short, both threat of force and use of force are equally prohibited and outlawed under the UN Charter. This is what is called jus cogens, mandatory international law from which there can be no voluntary or involuntary derogation. In Europe, Russia invaded Ukraine using armed force to settle a territorial dispute with Ukraine in gross violation of the foundational principle of the UN Charter. The UN General Assembly overwhelmingly condemned twice the Russian invasion. The Philippines voted with a majority to condemn Russia's use of force to settle the territorial dispute. In Asia, China is seizing the island territories and maritime zones of the Philippines through threat of force in gross violation of the foundational principle of the UN Charter. China's new Coast Guard law authorizes the Coast Guard vessels of China to use all necessary means, including the firing of weapons on foreign ships, to enforce China's expansive 9, now 10-dash line in the South China Sea. This new Coast Guard law of China is in itself a threat of force to all ASEAN coastal states whose maritime zones are claimed by China. China is claiming as its national territory the entire high seas of the South China Sea and large areas of the exclusive economic zones and extended continental shelves of the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Brunei, in gross violation of international law and the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS. The world must condemn China's threat of force in the South China Sea, in the same way that the world has condemned Russia's use of force in Ukraine. The failure to condemn China's threat of force will overturn the foundational principle of the UN Charter, which is the bedrock of our existing rules-based international legal order. Second, the Philippines and the EU believe that UNCLOS applies to the South China Sea. This means that in the South China Sea, there are high seas comprising about 25% of the South China Sea, and there are maritime zones, exclusive economic zones, and extended continental shelves belonging to the coastal states like the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and Indonesia, unimpaired by any historical claim like China's 9, now 10 dash line. The EU's support for the July 12, 2016 Arbitral Award underpins this common belief between the Philippines and the EU. In contrast, China claims that its 9, now 10 dash line prevails over UNCLOS. This means, according to China, UNCLOS does not apply to the South China Sea, but it applies to the rest of the oceans and seas of the planet. Such exceptionalism will lead to the demise of UNCLOS, as Russia will also claim parts of the Arctic Ocean and the entire Azov Sea. Already, China's 9, now 10 dash line means that the High Seas Treaty, now open for signature by all states, does not apply to the South China Sea, since China claims that the high seas in the South China Sea are China's national territory. It truly boggles the mind that in this day and age, China has the goal to claim as its national territory almost an entire sea, extending the territorial sea of China 50 times more than the maximum 12 nautical miles that UNCLOS allows and which the rest of the world faithfully follows. China even has the goal to enact a law threatening to use lethal force against foreign ships that violate China's expansive national territory in the South China Sea. In effect, China seeks to drastically overturn the existing international legal order through its new Coast Guard law. It is the duty of all other members of the United Nations to decisively oppose this move of China. The EU and the Philippines must strongly oppose any attempt of China to overturn the existing international legal order. Third, the Philippines accepts the EU's position that the EU has a legitimate interest in the South China Sea. For one, the EU's and the UK's inbound and outbound trade that pass through the South China Sea amounts to about $1 trillion annually. Also, the EU, UK, and all the countries of the world have a legitimate interest in the high seas of the South China Sea, since under UNCLOS, all the high seas of the world belong to mankind as part of the global commons. There is freedom of fishing for all states in all the high seas of the world, including the high seas in the South China Sea. Lastly, under UNCLOS, there is freedom of navigation and overflight for merchant and naval ships in all the exclusive economic zones and the high seas of the world, including in the South China Sea. The EU and the Philippines must actively defend and preserve this freedom of the seas. In conclusion, the common and shared belief between the Philippines and the EU on the South China Sea dispute comes down to a deep understanding of the need to preserve the existing rules-based international order as embodied in the foundational principle of the 1945 UN Charter, mandating the settlement of disputes by peaceful means and outlawing the threat or use of force in settling such disputes. The alternative is a horrifying return to the international legal order before the 1945 UN Charter, where might was right. Armed invasion was a legitimate means of annexing and expanding territory, and the threat or use of force was a legitimate means of settling disputes between states. This international legal order prior to the UN Charter led to two devastating world wars. Only the preservation of the existing foundational principles of the 1945 UN Charter will prevent a third world war that we all know will end human existence as it exists today. I end my presentation here. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Justice Carbia. We shall now open the floor for questions from the audience. The open forum is officially started. Do we have questions from the audience? If you do have questions, please approach the mic. We've also opened the chat boxes in both our YouTube channel and for our online audience. While waiting for questions to be fielded, we've been forwarded some questions from the online audience to our panelists. The first question is, China is an important economic partner of the European Union, and China is also an important economic partner to countries in the ASEAN region. And yet it is also considered to be a threat to countries of the European Union as well as of ASEAN. The question is, how do you think countries, including the Philippines, should evolve a balanced approach to the West Philippine Sea or the South China Sea question? Is there such a thing as a balanced approach considering the economic importance of China, but at the same time, given the current geostrategic and geoeconomic realities in the region? Anybody can answer it, but it's directed to the head of the delegation of the European Union.
Thank you much for the question. It's a very pertinent one, of course. I think every country has, of course, to strike a balance between its own interests and the interests of partners. And yes, China is, of course, also for Germany and also for almost, I think, all other countries in the EU, a very important trade partner. We have just published our new China strategy, which moves away a little bit from the word of defining China as a partner. China is also a competitor. China is a rival. That does not mean that we cut economic ties with China, but we also go for more diversification in our economic relations. We in Germany, we have painfully learned the hard way what it means to be dependent on one or two countries. Look at gas supplies from Russia that were cut directly after Ukraine was invaded by Russia. So we had a hard time in heating our houses in last winter. We succeeded, but we learned clearly that we have to diversify our economic relations. And I think also here, we are very much in the same boat as the Philippines. Also the Philippines, if I understand correctly, are diversifying. That is under the motto of securitization and diversification of economic relations. So, of course, you cannot cut your economic relations with China. China is too important in many ways. China delivers many things to the European Union. Many German and European exporters export to China, but that does not mean that China can do what it wants. Nevertheless, we have to make clear that the international rules-based order is a key for us. So it's not an either or, but it is both. We can do trade with China, and the same applies to the Philippines, but we have nevertheless always to remind them that the rules-based order is the basis of our understanding how the world should be organized. And I think that applies to all of us. Every country has to strike a balance, yes, and when I look at the South China Sea, of course it's not easy, and it's up to the Philippine government to decide how to handle this issue, how to deal with the different interests that are involved. On the one hand, economic ties with China, which are very intense. On the other hand, of course, the security situation in the South China Sea. But I'm convinced, and it was very good, very well exposed and clearly laid out by Justice Carpio, that we, the EU and Philippines, we have everything in common. We have a lot in common. I haven't heard anything where we are not on the same track. We have heard 3 things we are on the same track. And I haven't heard anything about where we don't share the same analysis. So I think it is very timely to have this meeting today and to again reassure us all that the European Union, with the member states, France and Germany present here, and the Philippines, we share the same, exactly the same view on the South China Sea issue. That may end my reply, and maybe other colleagues would comment.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think Justice Carpio has something to say.
Yes, I think the question is how do we maintain good economic relations with China at the same time defending our sovereign rights in the West Philippine Sea. All we have to do is to follow the example of Malaysia and Indonesia. 2 years ago, Malaysia sent its survey ship and drill ship to its exclusive economic zone. China said, you cannot do that. That area falls within the 9-dash line. There will be consequences. We can go to war with you. Malaysia ignored China, sent its survey and drill ship, accompanied by its Navy. At the same time, the US and Australia conducted naval drills in the same area. Malaysia was able to finish its survey and drill ship, completed everything that it needed to do in that area, and China couldn't do anything. Also, Indonesia did the same thing. Indonesia decided to survey and drill in the North Natunas because its reserves were depleted already. So it has to open new gas fields. China said you cannot do that in the North Natuna under the 9-dash line. Indonesia nevertheless sent its survey and drill ship, accompanied by its Navy, and at the same time, the U.S. aircraft carrier Ronald Reagan happened to pass by. The Chinese Coast Guard couldn't do anything. The Indonesians completed their survey and drilling. But both Malaysia and Indonesia have very robust economic trade relations with China. In the case of the Philippines, President Duterte during his time said, we don't want war. I will not send the survey ship to Reed Bank. So it takes 4 years to develop Reed Bank. Malampaya is running out of gas. In 2 years, there will be no more gas from Malampaya. And we have to import liquefied natural gas. Our energy costs will go up by at least 50%. So it can be done. You're looking at a balance. We just have to follow the example of Malaysia and Indonesia. It needs political will, but it can be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have questions from the audience? Yes, Howie, please. Please approach the microphone. Howie, Mr. Severino.
Very interesting discussion. My name is Howie Severino. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has been mentioned several times already. I'd like to ask the entire panel, but whoever would want to answer, what are the lessons from the Russian invasion of Ukraine that can be applied to our part of the world? And what kind of lessons should China be deriving from what's going on in Europe? Especially since China's saber rattling towards Taiwan in the last several years reminds us of Russia's saber rattling before the invasion of Ukraine. If China does ramp up its aggression in this part of the world, how should they expect the rest of the world, and especially European nations, to respond?
Thank you, Howie. And a response from our panel.
I will just give a few some elements, and then my co-panelists can complement. I think one very important thing is just not accepting what is being done, because also it represents a precedent for other parts of the world. So it's very important that the UN General Assembly, in two occasions at least, even three, and other multilateral fora had condemned the invasion. That's very important. Of course, doesn't help the defense, the Ukrainian defense on the spot, but that's something that can be used also in many other cases to stand by the rule of law and by the UN Charter. And that's also something that, as Honorable Justice Carpio mentioned that is an example that can apply also in the South China Sea. Another important thing from the EU perspective, of course, the EU has not been attacked by Russia, but it has been affected seriously by the effects. And the intra-EU solidarity and the possibility to react as a bloc has helped a lot to cope with the energy situation and even militarily. So I think in Southeast Asia, the ASEAN countries are trying to negotiate with China the code of conduct, and they are affirming ASEAN centrality. Probably they cannot do much one by one bilaterally with China, but if they work together, and I think that's the intention also of the government, to cooperate more with Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia. So the unity with other partners helps, and not only in the region, also we see the Philippines cooperating with Japan, with Australia, and in the same way in Europe. So working with like-minded partners is very important also to cope with the effects. And then what we are trying to do also in Europe, as Ambassador Pfaffernoschke mentioned, was to reduce dependencies. Sometimes you have a partner that can be very powerful and not always abiding by the international rule of law. You have to diversify your economy, you have to diversify your energy sources, etc., etc. So that's a lesson that we have learned the hard way in Europe, and that can also provide elements of reflection for other parts of the world, including the South China Sea. But probably there are other lessons as well. I don't know if
Justice.
Yes. What lessons do we learn from the Russian invasion of Ukraine? Well, Ukraine had no treaty ally. It was all alone. It did not have an ally that was nuclear armed. It didn't even have an ally without nuclear arms. But Ukraine used to have a third of the nuclear arms of the USSR. When the USSR dissolved, it inherited a third of the nuclear weapons of the USSR. It was a nuclear power. Russia, US, and UK convinced Ukraine to give up its nuclear arms in exchange for a guarantee of that these three countries will respect the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. 1994. Less than 10 years later, Russia invaded Crimea. So the lesson there is, if your neighbor covets your territory or maritime zone, you have to prepare for your defense. Either you have a nuclear weapon or you stock up on your conventional weapons or have a treaty ally who is nuclear armed. Because if your neighbor has nuclear arms, covets your territory or marine zones, and you don't have any defense, then you are just inviting your neighbor to annex your territory. And that is what happened in Ukraine. In the South China Sea, we have a neighbor in the North, China, that is nuclear armed, with the largest naval fleet in the world, coveting our territory, island territories, maritime zones. Fortunately, we have a treaty with the US, and the US is nuclear armed. So China cannot do Ukraine on us, because if you look at BRP Sierra Madre, it's a dilapidated ship. It cannot sail anymore. China can take it anytime, can seize it. It's totally defenseless. But we still carry that ship in a roster of active Philippine public vessel warship. So an armed attack on BRP Sierra Madre triggers the operation of the Mutual Defense Treaty. And the last thing that China wants is to give the US a legal excuse to intervene in the South China Sea. So we have that deterrence. We don't, practically, we don't have a military capability to fend off, to stop a Chinese invasion, but we have that treaty with the US. So that's preventing China from doing a Ukraine on us. So that's the lesson. If a country does not have a treaty with a nuclear armed power, like Vietnam. So Vietnam is being bullied, more bullied by China than the Philippines. Vietnam could not get its gas because they were stopped by China from getting the gas. The Spanish company that drilled there they had to stop, and Vietnam had to compensate. ExxonMobil also had to exit. So they have a big problem because they have a land border, but they don't have a treaty ally. So if your neighbor covets your territory, either you have a credible self-defense force, or you align yourself with a strong treaty ally. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
If I
Yes,
may-
please approach the microphone. Oh,
No.
just a minute, ma'am.
Sorry, just if I may compliment, as a diplomat, we are of course preferring political solutions, not military ones. So let me say again, I think one of the main lessons for you from the Ukraine crisis should be united. Be united as the EU was united when it came to facing the Russian aggression against Ukraine. I'm convinced Russia did not expect the EU and the West in general and the world in general, because it was referred to the 160 votes that were in favor of the resolutions in New York, to be so united against the aggression. Russia underestimated the ability of Europe, of the EU, to find a common answer to that. And I think one of the main tasks for Philippine diplomacy would be to do the same in ASEAN. Having as ASEAN being really outspoken and united on how to react on a possible Chinese aggression. The last ASEAN summit in Jakarta was a first step, but I think there is room for improvement. And I would really say, this is the lesson. Be united, find your partners, and prepare a very strong political answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, please, may we hear you?
Yes, good afternoon or good evening. I'm Carla. I'm a researcher from the Foreign Service Institute, also a part-time lecturer at Ateneo in the department. My question is addressed to our European speakers. There seems to be an increasing perception of link between transatlantic and Indo-Pacific security, is this something you share? Will we be seeing a more collective approach from EU and or NATO, or a more fragmented strategy? So if you want me to repeat the questions, I can. So there seems to be an increasing link between transatlantic and Indo-Pacific strategy. Is this something you share? And will we be seeing a more collective approach between EU and or NATO, or a more fragmented strategy in the future?
So anyone from the panel would like to answer that question, the link between a transatlantic and the Indo-Pacific strategy, and the possibility of a coherent collective action from the NATO? Okay.
Not an easy question, but thank you for the question. Need to reflect on that. If, well, that's normal. We don't know everything, and we do not always have an answer. So being provoked by such a very academic, intelligent question is always a challenge. But let me say, I think NATO is, of course, a different enemy, a different child than what we have in security cooperation with the Indo-Pacific region. I mean, NATO was born in the Cold War. NATO is a military alliance, mainly a military alliance. And what we do here, what we do have here, is definitely not so much a military alliance. What the EU is doing, what Germany is doing, what we are doing together is also a lack of military capacities, definitely not building a military alliance. You had SEATO at the time, Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, which was kind of a copy of NATO for the Southeastern region. As far as I'm aware, it has not the same dynamic as NATO has, also due to the Ukraine war now. So there might be parallels. One might think about more cooperation. One might think about also applying the same approach also in the region here. But as NATO was an organization, or is still an organization that combines the members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that cannot be copied here in a simpler manner. I mean, you have other security partners. You have Japan, you have Australia, you have, of course, the US, you have Korea, which are firm partners of the Philippines, but on a bilateral basis, if I understand correctly, mainly on a bilateral basis, not so much a multilateral approach. And quite frankly, from a German point of view, I do not see that Germany will be able to play a role like Australia, Japan, or South Korea here in the region. So I think the approach is very different.
Mm-hmm. Perhaps you can also hear from Mr. Folleas.
Yes, of course. Once again, we strongly believe that, yes, there is a link between our alliances. There is a link between. Could you repeat, please, like the last part of your question, please?
It's a complicated question you posed there.
I don't want to miss the target. So.
So the question I wanted to ask is, there has been this perception that of this link, transatlantic security and Indo-Pacific security, will be seeing a more collective approach from EU and or NATO, or a more fragmented strategy, perhaps?
Well, there has been a shift in focus from my own point of view, from this region, from transatlantic region to the Asia-Pacific region, for obvious reason that has been cited before. I won't repeat what my colleagues and from European nation have said, but it is a very important part of European countries' strategies from the EU standpoint, also from member state standpoints. So there is a shift in focus towards this region. Now, as Ambassador Pfaffernoschke said, we cannot hope to hold the same place as big nations such as the US in the region regarding security matters, but we want to keep invested in this region. As I said during my speech, we also have in the region military presence for France, so it is a very important matter in terms of security, and we would like to renew that we are here, we are present in the region, and yeah.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, there's no more time, but we'd like to hear the members of our panel say a few more things, your final statement. What would this be, please? So if you're going to highlight a very important point that you made in your presentation, would you like to present it as your final statement? Please address the audience.
Shall I go first? Again, I think we could also change the sequence this time, but fine, okay. Now I try a closing statement, which will not be repetitive. But what I found very interesting is the analysis that comes out of this evening. And it was already mentioned by some of the speakers before. We are united. The Philippines and the EU share the same interests, share the same ideas, share the same policy approach on the South China Sea. And the Honorable Justice Antonio Carpio mentioned the three things we have in common. Again, that cannot be repeated loud enough. We share the view, we share maybe the vision of a world based on the rules-based order of the Charter of the United Nations, and we share the same approach, saying that the South China Sea is, of course, not the high sea of China, not the region of China, but it is clearly territorial waters, the economic zone of the Philippines. That's why the theme today is also West Philippine Sea and not South China Sea. So my conclusion is, let's work on that. Let's cooperate again to make us politically strong, be united on the clear messaging vis-à-vis our Chinese partners. I'm tempted to say rivals. And let's stick together working on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Ruiz?
I will, it's a bit on the same line, but I will quote, not quote, but refer to what President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, conveyed to President Marcos when she visited at the end of July. She also said that precisely that we are one with the Philippines and other international partners in stressing the importance of upholding international law, including UNCLOS and the peaceful settlement of disputes as the basis for international peace and stability. For the European Union, UNCLOS and the 2016 arbitration award on the South China Sea provide the basis for peacefully resolving disputes between the parties. The EU opposes any unilateral attempts to change the peacefully established status of territories or maritime spaces by force or coercion anywhere in the world, be it in Eastern Europe or in South China Sea. As my High Representative of the EU for Foreign and Security Policy, Josep Borrell, said, we need to defend core security principles whenever and wherever they are threatened, from Ukraine to the South and East China Seas and beyond. And this is a position that the European Union has expressed in its political and security dialogues with partners in and outside the region, including the Philippines and ASEAN. But we also have had very candid exchanges on these matters with China. We have said, what I'm saying to you now, we have told China, we have said China this. We have underlined our concerns. And for the European Union, the South China Sea and the Indo-Pacific and all the oceans should be seas of opportunity and cooperation, not of confrontation. We think that international cooperation is essential in areas such as the safety and security of maritime transport, protection of marine environment and biodiversity, preventing and combating marine pollution, fisheries control, protecting critical maritime infrastructure, etc., etc. So it's more important to push for this positive agenda than violating rules and affecting the legitimate interests and rights of other countries. So we are ready to continue and extend our contributions and our support to the Philippines and other countries around the South China Sea, also in all those areas.
Thank you, Dr. Ruiz. Mr. Folleas.
On my end, I will remain very simple, but I would like to renew once again that France's perspective aligns with the European Union's steadfast commitment to international law and multilateral collaboration. Our perspective echoes with the broader European sentiment and underscores the importance of working collectively to address global challenges. Once again, the Philippines are a very important partner, and through collaborative efforts, it's an important stakeholder and partner in the region. France's reiteration of support of the 2016 arbitral tribunal ruling and its alignment with the broader European Union perspective exemplify our common dedication to peaceful resolution and regional stability.
Thank you. Justice Scarpia.
Before the 1945 UN Charter, the rule, the international legal order was might is right. You can use threat of force, you can use force to settle a territorial dispute. If you win the war, then what you have done is correct. You will be rewarded with the annexation of territory. And that regime, that rule of law, before UN Charter, led to 2 world wars, 2 devastating world wars. So the 1945 UN Charter outlawed the threat or use of force to settle a territorial dispute. Today, Russia is trying to go back to the old regime by invading Ukraine to settle a territorial dispute. And China is invading our island territories and maritime zones by using threat of force. So these 2 countries are trying to overturn the existing legal order. Europe and the Philippines must combine with the rest of the world to stop Russia and China from overturning the current international legal order as enshrined in the 1945 UN Charter, because the alternative is we go back to the pre-1945 UN Charter, which means there will be a 3rd World War, and that will end the world as we know it today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the powerful note, Justice Scarpia. Now, to formally conclude our event, let us hear from Mr. Rodolfo Severino III, who will be speaking on behalf of the Severino family.
Father Baba Yap, His Excellency Ambassador Dr. Pfaffernoschke, His Excellency Ambassador Basilio, Dr. Ruiz, Monsieur Folleas, Your Honor Justice Scarpio, Dr. Vilches, Dr. Salvador, members of the Romulo family who are in attendance here and online, friends with the Ateneo de Manila, honorable guests, both here in person and online. On behalf of the entire Severino family, it is truly an honor for me to express our deepest and most heartfelt gratitude to all who have devoted their time, knowledge, resources, and energy to the ongoing success of the Rodolfo C. Severino Endowment Fund Lecture Series. We want to thank this distinguished panel who so eloquently share their expertise today to further the pursuit of peaceful dialogue, understanding, and cooperation between nations, which my father championed through his life's career and work. We want to express our utmost gratitude to the family of late Ambassador Roberto Romulo, under whose leadership and vision the Rodolfo C. Severino Endowment Fund was established, and His Excellency Ambassador Basilio for his tireless commitment in facilitating the lecture series, a critical component in my father's legacy. We want to thank the Department of Foreign Affairs and the good people who remain dedicated to the vision of peace and understanding, a most noble mission in this era of today in which the very future of humanity depends upon the success of diplomacy. We want to thank Father Yap and the professorial community of Ateneo de Manila, an institution which has been an indelible part of our family's history, my father having graduated with honors from this great university. My brother Howie not only graduated from Ateneo High School, but was also a teacher here for some time thereafter, still remembered very fondly by many of his former students. I myself spent 3 very formative years at the grade school and the high school. And now, as we speak, a 3rd generation, Howie's son, my nephew Alon, has taken after his grandfather and is excelling as a college student at Ateneo, majoring in creative writing. So for many reasons, this lecture series is truly a family affair for us Severinos. But this 3rd edition of the series, focusing on the European perspective on the West Philippine Sea, is especially poignant, not only because a great deal of my father's diplomatic work concerned this issue, but also because Europe has occupied a very special place in the Severinos' hearts. As many of you know, my grandfather, that is my father's father, Lolo Rodolfo, was among the first generation of Philippine diplomats after independence. He was assigned to Madrid and London, traveling extensively around Europe during his tenure there. Lolo Rodolfo was a prolific postcard writer and chronicled many of his travels in postcards he sent to our grandmother, Lola Trining, from various parts of the continent, memories and words his descendants treasured dearly. In 1974, when my father's first foreign assignment at the Philippine Embassy in Washington, D.C. ended, and he was recalled back to the Home Office, he decided to take our family on a circuitous route home to Manila through parts of Europe. I was only 10 years old at the time, and Howie was 12. It was the first time we kids ever set foot on that side of the Atlantic. I think Howie would agree that this voyage Dad took us on through England and Italy was one of the most pivotal experiences of our upbringing. This photo, taken in Amalfi, remains one of the most precious pieces in our family album. And as my mother would recount later, Ambassador Terry Espinas arranged for us to have front pew seats at Sunday Mass celebrated by the Holy Father, Pope Paul VI in the Vatican. Now, in the 21st century, in the face of mounting global tensions, my father's vision lives on through the Rodolfo C. Severino Endowment Fund and continues to give us hope that peace, dialogue, understanding, diplomacy, friendship, and cooperation among nations will prevail. And for this, not only are the Severino family thankful, but present and future generations worldwide will be eternally beholden to this ever-important institution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kokoy Severino. And now for our closing remarks, may we please hear our University President, Father Roberto Yap of the Society of Jesus.
Good friends on site and online, thank you for joining us for this important lecture. I would now like to express my gratitude to our speakers for this year's Ambassador Rodolfo C. Severino Endowment Fund Lecture. Ambassador Andreas Pfaffernoschke, Dr. Ana Isabel Sanchez Ruiz, Mr. Adam Folleas, Justice Antonio Carpio. Thank you for sharing your perspectives on the West Philippine Sea. Thank you for respecting the Philippines' territorial integrity and recognizing the navigational rights, freedoms, and duties established under UNCLOS. I also wish to thank our moderator, Dr. Alma Salvador, the Carlos P. Romulo Foundation for Peace and Development, represented by Ambassador Basilio, the Severino family, Howie and Kokoy Severino, our own Department of Political Science, the European Studies Program, the Ateneo, as well as the many hands behind the scenes that organize this event. We would only have this rich and enlightening discussion because of your efforts. There is plenty to reflect upon the points raised by our distinguished speakers. But now more than ever, it is crucial that we remain committed to upholding our rights, duties, and responsibilities. As our speakers underscored, respecting the rule of law is essential. Maritime transport remains the backbone of international trading, so when maritime security is threatened, economic growth and socio-political relations among nations are affected, undermining peace and security. And in this age of environmental concern, it is also important to really maintain the maritime diversity and also the sustainability and the use of the many, many resources available in the West Philippine Sea. With these sentiments in mind, let me take this opportunity to reaffirm Ateneo de Manila's commitment to engage meaningfully in conversations on pressing matters of national and international concerns. We all have roles to play in helping maintain peace, stability, and unity in our regions. Focusing on the greater good and forging stronger ties through engagement, cooperation, and communication will help us realize our shared vision of a prosperous, peaceful, and sustainable world. Thank you for attending the Ambassador Rodolfo C. Severino Endowment Fund Lecture. I wish you all a good evening, magandang gabi, at maraming salamat sa inyo.
Father Bobby, please stay. May we call on Father Bobby? Father Bobby, please stay. And Mr. Cocoy Severino for the distribution of tokens of gratitude to our distinguished panelists. So token for Justice Carpio. Token for Mr. Folleas. For Dr. Ruiz. And for His Excellency Ambassador Thank you very much, everyone. Before we formally conclude our event, we would like to say thank you to the following offices and units: School of Social Sciences of the Loyola Schools, Ateneo Department of Political Science, Ateneo European Studies Program, Arete, Campus Safety and Mobility Office, thank you, UMCO, University Marketing and Communications Office, Office of the Vice President for Digital Information and Tech Services, DITS, Office of the University Development and Alumni Affairs, Carlos P. Romulo Foundation, the Severino family, Department of Foreign Affairs. Thank you once again for your enthusiastic participation. To the audience, good evening. Thank you very much. That concludes our forum. May we please call in our guests and our panelists for our photo ops. Thank you.